Coming up, unions UNTU and SAFTU speak to us ahead of International Workers' Day tomorrow. 4 accused are expected to appear in the Bloemfontein Magistrates Court on the 3rd and 4th of May in connection with convicted murderer and rapist Thabo Beste's escape from Mangaung prison. An extraordinary council meeting will be convened on Tuesday for the election of a new City of Johannesburg mayor. Welcome. We are coming to you live from our studios in Auckland Park, Johannesburg. Thank you for tuning in. You are watching The Week Ahead. You can interact with us on social media platforms at Week Ahead, hashtag The Week Ahead. I'm your host, Asanda Magaqa. Families of the victims of the Saulspoort bus disaster in the Free State say they are still traumatized by the incident. This year marks 20 years since a bus plunged into the dam, claiming the lives of 51 people. Workers from the Saulspoort municipality in the Northern Cape were traveling to a May Day rally in the Free State. The families of the deceased and the survivors are expected to be honored and remembered on Monday. COSATU honors fallen workers annually on Workers' Day.
20 years on, May Day is still a sad day for this family.
Every year when the day comes, we really feel terrible. The whole family, especially me, because I had to make all the arrangements when she died.
As news of the bus disaster at the Saulspoort Dam reached Kimberley, Tumi Williams was tasked with finding out if her aunt, Elizabeth Ngwatu, was among the dead.
I didn't really believe that she was in that bus, but then I had to go to my grandmother's house to go and find out more if she was really in that bus. The whole family were so shocked, and we were all scared. So after then we got calls from the Saulspoort municipality that we have to go to Bloemfontein.
The former cleaner and caterer was 53 when the bus accident claimed her life.
It was in hall or something like that. So there were a lot of nurses, ambulances and social workers for counseling of the families that lost their loved ones. But I was afraid to go and identify my aunties.
COSATU will commemorate the bus disaster again this year. It has events lined up at the Saulspoort Dam where the tragedy unfolded. Ulrich Hendricks, SABC News, Kimberley, Northern Cape.
For more on the issues of workers ahead of International Workers' Day tomorrow, we are joined by Remembrance Zwane, a young worker and branch secretary at the United National Transport Union, which is affiliated to FEDUSA. We also have Trevor Shaku, spokesperson of the South African Federation of Trade Unions, SAFTU. To both of you gentlemen, a very good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us on The Week Ahead. I can see that we only have one of the gentlemen, so let's just get straight into it. A very good afternoon to you. It's 29 years since the dawn of democracy, and this did not stop workers from protesting. Talk to us about how far the dispensation, or rather how far the workforce has progressed in this democratic dispensation. I'm starting with you, Trevor.
Okay, thank you very much, and thanks for having us. The conditions of workers in this country would have progressed somehow politically. The reason that you have me representing a black trade union here on your show today is a representation or an indication of the fact that in terms of politics, there were various advances that have been made by the progress of the liberal democratic dispensation, which began in 1994. However, insofar as the socio-economic conditions of workers are concerned, the conditions have remained somewhat the same, and even to a particular extent have been reversed. And this, you hear it even in the reflections of workers, who will tell you that the conditions today are worse actually, compared to the time when this movement itself began to take shape in the 1970s, in the 1980s, and all of that.
We are still fleshing out issues ahead of Workers' Day tomorrow, and we are still with Trevor, who is with FEDUSA, or rather a transport-affiliated union to FEDUSA. Trevor, I apologize for that abrupt, break, but let us please proceed with our conversation. You were talking about the many strides that have been done on behalf of workers and the progress of the workers in the democratic dispensation, but you were just touching on some of the shortcomings, or rather what is causing workers not to progress at the rate that would be satisfactory to you. Would you care to elaborate on that?
Yes, and just a correction there. I'm the national spokesperson of the South African Federation of Trade Unions, SAFTU.
Apologies.
So the point I was making is that politically, the workers have made gains, which are concrete and meaningful to our continued day-to-day experiences in the working class movement, in organizing, and that the fact that I'm here representing a black trade union itself is an indicator of that milestone, which has been made by the liberation struggles of the workers, but also of the liberation movements in the 60s, 70s, 80s, until the demise of apartheid in 1994. However, the socio-economic conditions of workers somewhat remain a little bit backward in comparison to where they were in 1994. And I was trying to demonstrate that you can even hear this from the opinions that workers would give about the conditions of today and those of apartheid era, pre-1994. But just a quick look at, for instance, the education system, you'll realize there that indeed we're losing a lot insofar as that is concerned, and workers have not made and are not enjoying the fruits of freedom insofar as that is concerned. And for instance, if you look at public schooling, your public schools have serious lack of infrastructure. And this, combined with understaffing in public education, leads to overcrowding of classrooms, which both presents challenges for the learners who must learn in those particular environments, but also for teachers who must ensure that they teach in those environments. The schools lack equipment, schools lack a number of other issues, key issues including key instruments, including data, internet, and even computer laboratories, including libraries, ablution facilities, and all of that. Insofar as workers are concerned, you have high levels of unemployment, which insofar as things are at the current moment, you have 42% of unemployment. Over 11 million people in this country are not employed. And 74% or 70% of that is youth between the ages of 15 and 24. And in addition to that, it's black women who constitute more than 50% of all women who are unemployed in this country. Now, if you look at the problems in relation to this, you'll realize that really the conditions of workers socioeconomically have not really improved to the levels that we would expect them to improve. And yeah.
42% unemployment, I think you said 11 million people unemployed, and the frightening, or rather scary levels of youth unemployment. But this is occurring simultaneously with rising costs of living. How are South Africans are supposed to survive when you consider this unemployment and consider the rising cost of living and consider an economy that is also not growing at a rate that would be satisfactory and interest rates that seem to be going up endlessly?
Yeah, it's really difficult for workers really to live in this period with the crises you have mentioned. I mean, the capitalist system is structured in a way that because it has generalized commodities and commodification of goods and services, any person who has to access them has to have an income, has to have money, and that money they can only earn from income. Now, for the 90% of the working class majority in this country, we know that they have to juggle the rising cost of living without even a little income that they should be receiving, because 11 million unemployed people means that you have 11 million people, adults, who are of working age group, who cannot have an income and therefore cannot be able to afford the services and goods which ought to be traded to them, for them to be able to get shelter, for them to be able to get refuse, water, electricity, food, and many other essentials that households require. They have to buy them, especially this particular trend. You'll see it in the urban areas where the manifestation of capitalism is more pronounced and every aspect and sphere of life is commodified. So in those instances, you'll realize that workers really are not able to juggle around in these circumstances. But in addition to that, you have workers who, beyond unemployment, who in the economy, 75% of them are earning less than 5,800. And this is in the context of the rising cost of living. Food has been increasing, and we see with the decline in production in the country, and I've read some analysis yesterday that production is really declining in this country. And if production declines, we've seen throughout history that always leads to hyperinflation. And we might be in for a hyperinflation where food prices will go up together with devaluation of the currency in the country. That will lead to serious and total catastrophe for the working class household.
Yet tomorrow, workers are expected to commemorate Workers' Day, and we do know that 1st of May is Workers' Day. What is your outlook as to what would workers expect to hear from their leaders tomorrow in the commemoration of this day?
I think workers must expect from their leaders a couple of things. The first one is the response to the crisis of the cost of living, of unemployment, of rising interest rates, and just generally the unaffordability that exists for working class households. Two, they've got to expect a program that will respond to the growing inequality and poverty in this country. You have got about 30 million people in this country who are surviving below the upper bound poverty line of 1,417 rand per month. And on top of that, like I said, most of this working class are propped up by individuals in the economy who are working but are earning less than 5,800. So they've got to be a program of action on how are we going to respond to the rising food prices, how are we going to respond to unemployment levels, but generally just the crisis of the cost of living. How are we going to be able to respond to that? And thirdly, I think workers have to expect from their leaders a true reflection of what the trade union movement is at the current moment. Are we on the right track as our forebearers would have expected us, or the tenets, the principles, and the tradition that was established by our forebearers in the historic 1973 struggles, in the historic struggles of the 1970s generally and of the 1980s? Are we on the right track insofar as trade union democracy is concerned, worker control is concerned? Because all of these have a bearing on the ability and the capacity of the trade union movement, the labor organizations, and all of the working class formations to be able to respond to the crisis of capitalism. So the leaders of the trade union movement have to honestly reflect on their ability to be able to respond to this, and what are the internal challenges which are hindering them to be able to to come up with an effective response to the crisis of cabalism.
Now imagine for a second that you were the one, or rather it was the South African Federation of Trade Unions that would be at that rally, addressing the May Day rally tomorrow. You mentioned a program of action. One, two or three things from that program of action that you would present?
From our program of action, the first one is the fighting internally within the working class movement towards unity, because without unity, we're not going to be able to make any meaningful gains, concrete gains against the system, against neoliberalism, against treasury that has been implementing austerity measures in this country. But insofar as the socio-economic program is concerned, we put a 15-pointed demands, which is part of the program or the demands which we have put forward in the past. And those particular demands include, amongst others, a fight for a basic income grant for the unemployed, but secondly, a fight for the creation of employment in order to beat unemployment that is rising at alarming rates. And the only way to do that, we put again in the program, that the only way to do this would be for us to be able to put the country at an reindustrializing mode, away from the industrialization of the neoliberalism that has occurred in the past 29 years. And for us to be able to do that, government would have to be on a spending mode. It can't be administering budget cuts at a time when the economy needs saturation. It needs lubrication in terms of finances to be able to prop up small businesses which currently are struggling. I mean, most businesses that collapse in this country are SMMEs. And they, of course, come and complain that the rigid labor laws are the ones which are creating these conditions. But we argue otherwise. And to the contrary, we are saying that the problems of SMMEs unable to flourish is because, first and foremost, there is concentration and centralization in production, centralization of business in the country. If you look at Competition Commission statistics, you'll realize that there are measures on a monthly basis ranging from 10 to 30. And all of those measures are actually indicative of the fact that the economy is centralizing. And what do you do in such states? Because a country that is centralizing and monopolizing will always lead to, first and foremost, rising prices, because those companies become the price makers rather than price takers, as the laws of competition dictates. But eventually, we know that these companies by all means try to restructure their businesses in order to maximize profits, and in the process, they retrench our workers. So this is one of those...
Trevor, I do apologize for this interjection, but I think that we have more than enough covered what is to be expected from tomorrow, May Day, an internationally commemorated day in recognition of workers across the world. Thank you very much for your time. That is Trevor Shaku, who is the spokesperson for the South African Federation of Trade Unions, SAFTU. Week Ahead continues after this break. Before we go to the ad break, staying on with workers, truck drivers across the country embarked on a national strike this morning. They have also threatened to blockade most major roads. This is in protest to highlight their plight, among others, unfavorable recruitment processes. For more on this, we're now joined by Manukelana Manana, acting spokesperson of the All Drivers Forum Allied South Africa. A very good afternoon to you, sir. Thank you very much for joining us on the show. What are some of the issues that the truck drivers are protesting for?
Thanks very much. Good afternoon to everyone. Good afternoon to the viewers at home. I think, my sister, we have set out straight message in regarding to distributing our poster. Then our demands are attached based on that memorandum was circulated around the continent.
Are they going to block the road?
How big a pardon?
Are there going to be blockages on the road?
No, actually the peaceful demonstration is not all about we are blockaging the road. If you can check most of the roads the traffic is flowing smoothly, apart from the start. Because we need to set up a straight message. We are sick and tired to speaking about the one thing over and over again. Since 6 years now, we're still speaking here. We have no progress state that we can brought into our members so they can come.
In my introduction, I mentioned that one of your key grievances is unfavorable recruitment processes. Can you give us more details into the grievances that truck drivers have?
I think the grievance that we are lining up in there is a very common grievance which we have been deliberate extensively based on it. Since from the establishment of the task committee, before that, we were setting our point straight at what are we anticipated to be happening, because we can't allow the people who are serving us on a department, sort of like the government department, like your labor, like your home affairs, like anything to violating our rights and to violating our laws of the country. Those people, they are there to monitor our law, which our law are following from the onset until to the last ladder.
This strike is happening on the eve of International Workers' Day, May Day. Now, you've already described the working conditions on the roads for truck drivers and workers in the freight industry in general. How will you be marking May Day tomorrow?
It's a surprise to us to hear that there is something like we call as a May Day. Us as a driver, we are not subjected to that celebration or etc. because we are still living under the condition which you may not describe. We are still sitting here, the camera is looking on me, of which all the rights who are contained by the constitution of the country, it says everyone is to be protected. But apart from us as a driver, we feel that this constitution doesn't work for us, works for those who have got preference on our government. Because if this constitution is talking about us, I don't think there should be a camera which is looking at me now. I don't think there were cameras out. There should be taking my voice, because the CASA Act doesn't allow someone to recording me without my consent. So now I don't think there is a necessary for the driver to go there and celebrate the baseless Workers' Day, because we are still living on a situation whereby we are exploited day in, day out. Thank you.
Mr. Manana, you sound particularly aggrieved about this camera that is focused on you, and unfortunately I'm not privy to that visual. Can you describe exactly what it is that is going on?
What is going on based on what?
You are talking about a camera that is focused on you, and that you also mentioned that this constitution is one that you don't feel particularly protects workers in the freight industry, and you sound particularly aggrieved about that. So I'm asking you to describe in greater detail what exactly are you talking about, this camera that is focused on you. For what reason is it focused on you?
Sister, the camera is on our monument. It's on our monument. So we've got supporting section that's supporting us. I don't know what is happening there. There's an echo there behind you.
Let us leave it there, Mr. Manana. He is the acting spokesperson of the All Drivers Forum Allied South Africa. Certainly a story that we want to look into greater detail, perhaps later on SABC News. Welcome back. Let's get some analysis of the labor movements in South Africa. And to do that, we are joined by Kaya Sithole, independent analyst. Good afternoon, and thank you for making the time, Kaya. 29 years into democracy, protests have not stopped. Cost of living is high. What can workers look forward to as the world commemorates International Workers' Day tomorrow on May Day, the 1st of May.
Good afternoon, and good afternoon to the viewers. So I think obviously the story of the labor movement is a mixed one. And I think when we reflect on what has happened over the past 29 years, it is actually quite an interesting irony in that a lot of the issues that the labor movement was founded upon relating to workers' rights and income security for workers were issues that were crystallized into the various legislation that has been put in place since 1994. The consequence of that is that perhaps there has been a letting down of the guard, if you can call it that, in relation to the unionization, for example, where we now very few unions have got a huge membership base, very few unions command that type of social leadership, because in essence, a lot of the issues that they would have been championing are issues that have been crystallized into either the labor law or the Labor Relations Act. So that's been the one particular development affecting unions over the past 29 years. But also, quite interestingly, what we're seeing is that there is actually a need for unions to establish themselves in relation to the changing and the evolving world of work. So the world of work as we knew it 20 or 30 years ago is very different to the world of work today. And in relation to that, there are very few organizations or very few unions that seem to have adapted in a manner that enables new types of workers and new types of working conditions to be encapsulated into what the unions stand for. So you're seeing a decline in the unionization on the basis that people don't feel that the unions are responsive to the conditions that prevail today in the workplace.
On that note of unions not being responsive and this being the feeling of workers, are labor movements still relevant and do they have a role to play in the future?
I think they definitely have a role to play in the future. The problem seems to be them identifying what their role ought to be. So we do now know that the old model of a person latching onto a job and holding on to that job for 40 years until retirement is no longer the way things are. So people need to adapt across different working conditions and different working life cycles. And what we're seeing is that in South Africa, we do not have very strong mechanisms that enable people to transition across different job profiles. So if you look at the ESCOM conversation, for example, when people talk about what will happen to the miners in the coal belt if we decide to decarbonize and stop using coal operations as a basis for firing our power grid, there doesn't seem to be a very clear answer on how those individuals would be enabled to be reskilled and to be retransitioned into whatever the new focus area is going to be in relation to the country's energy grid. So if we can't even deal with simple and straightforward issues like that, you can imagine that in many more industries, there actually isn't a master plan of asking, what do we do right now? What do the workers do? How do we champion workers' rights? What do those rights look like in 10 or 15 years' time? And what we need to do in order to ensure that nobody is left behind in that particular transition. And if unions can find that sweet spot of redefining themselves in the future, then their relevance will definitely be reestablished.
What kind of redefining, when you talk about redefining in future, because as with everything else, any entity, organization has to modernize and keep up with the times. When you talk about modernizing in the future, what do you foresee?
So I think one of the key questions that we have to try and establish is what exactly are going to be the new focus areas in the world of work. So obviously, a country founded on mining, for example, where the different labor profile and the skills required for that particular economy, that is a country that you're never going to get back. So if you look at the demand and the need for high-level skills, what exactly are the type of partnerships that unions should already be creating and establishing to ensure that they partner either with SETAs or with higher education institutions so that there is a process of continuous reskilling and upskilling for the many marginalized workers? And when we say marginalized workers, they are the workers that when you and I celebrate that, look, you and I can do banking on a cell phone, for example, the marginalized workers are the people that used to serve us at the branch the day before, because suddenly what their core day-to-day activities used to be are some things that have been taken over by technological advances. So there is that particular level of displacement where the answers on to what ought to happen to those individuals and the people that relied on those individuals, as you know, that a wage in South Africa serves more than just a primary wage earner. That is the type of conversation that unions should be championing in order to ensure that actually we do end up with a more inclusive, even if it's more technologically advanced economic system. And at this stage, I'm not seeing much evidence of that being at the forefront of what unions are deliberating on.
Earlier on, I had an interview with a representative of workers in the freight and transportation industry about a strike that is currently ongoing of truck drivers. Now, keep that in mind, and with the rising cost of living and interest rates hiking, petrol price increasing, and these impact on direct on households, are we likely to see more strikes in the coming months?
I think there is definitely a sense of fragility associated with people whose wages and wage increases are far more rigid and are not responsive to the cost of living, for example. So we do know that historically, when the civil service or government workers were negotiating, CPI was seen as a proxy for starting, because obviously CPI in general reflected the cost of living. What we've seen over the past couple of years is that there's been these very, very huge spikes in the definition of cost of living, particularly since the invasion of the Ukraine last year. So what that now has created is that it's created inflationary spikes and new pressures on those whose wages were not stretching enough to begin with. And we haven't found the right answer to how do we actually insulate those particular wage earners from these spikes, as we do know that these spikes in the cost of living tend to affect low-income earners more than high-income earners. Because if you're a low-income earner, for example, a loaf of bread for you was already the one that you were buying. It was a brown loaf of bread. You are not buying a white loaf of bread and then you're going to migrate to a cheaper brown loaf of bread, for example. So if people are already stretched, it becomes difficult for them to know how to adapt those static salaries, those static wages, in order to be able to ensure that they can still afford as much as they were able to afford the day before. So until we find solutions, whether it's monetary or fiscal policy interventions that insulate people from these spikes in the cost of living, we are going to have these challenges.
That is where we're going to leave it for now. Kaya, thank you very much for your time. Kaya Sithole is an independent analyst and, of course, giving us thorough analysis around labor issues ahead of May Day tomorrow. Now, a group of workers from the LFC Milling company in Saulspoort in the Free State are still adamant that they will return to work. More than 80 workers have been on strike since 2021. Racism, a lack of equality, and salary increases are some of the issues they've raised. The workers affiliated to the National Emancipated and Allied Workers Union of South Africa have marched several times and took their grievances to management to no avail.
This LFC Milling company workers have been on strike since 2021. They've staged countless pickets and continue to show up outside the company's premises as a symbol of their protest. While some have lost hope, others are trying to get part-time jobs. But for many, getting their jobs back remains their only hope, particularly in the face of the current high rate of unemployment. 43-year-old Nzimeni Makialana worked here since 2018. His family of 5 depended on his salary, and now they are all forced to live off the children's social grants.
It is difficult at home. We no longer know if we are the men of the house. It is very difficult. Even our wives are now thinking that it's the union that is failing us, whereas it's the employer who is failing us while we are fighting for our rights. Now we are depending on the children's grant and there are no job opportunities.
Workers across the country are celebrating workers' rights on May Day, but for these workers, fighting for their rights is taking its toll on their livelihoods.
Since we started the strike in 2021, life has been tough. Now we depend on piece jobs and we don't even get lucky.
We've been living in these difficult conditions for a long time, to the extent that I feel like I'm losing my mind. We want to know how long the company is going to treat us like this.
The children who have been supporting me are tired of feeding me. It is very difficult and the employer doesn't care about us. It's painful. When you are not working, it's worse. I started working here in 2013.
Nyausa says the employer has been sending them from pillar to post.
Otherwise, they are living with hopes that the problem of the strike will be resolved. We have tried from our side as the union that we used Section 150A of Labour Relations Act to apply assistance from CCMA.
Labour law lecturer Maralise Conradi says there has been improvement in terms of laws protecting workers' rights, but there's more work to be done.
And yes, we also provide more protection to atypical employees. For example, labour broker workers, part-time workers, fixed-term workers and temporary workers. But is it enough? We don't want to be over-regulated in any country, but I think there are two areas where we should divide specific attention to.
LFC Milling says the matter is before the CCMA and will not comment further, as the labour legislation is the only avenue to deal with the matter correctly. Meanwhile, the Department of Labour in the Free State says it has investigated the claim of underpayment and found that employees were paid properly. Makhala Masiteng, SABC News, Saulspoort.
Financial problems are one of the most stressful things that can happen to a family. But how do children, particularly teenagers, deal with their parents' financial stress? Experts say children raised in households that are constantly dealing with financial strain can develop manipulative tendencies, and this can worsen the financial situation at home.
There are signs that households are under financial strain. Food prices are also rising rapidly, affecting their affordability. The South African Reserve Bank has hiked the repo rate 9 times since the end of 2021. Banks are starting to factor in the risk of some default on their loans. But for parents with teenage children, their plight can often fall on deaf ears due to peer pressure. Personal finance experts say it's often difficult for teenagers to grasp the extent of their parents' financial problems.
Generally, children live in their own world. You know, they understand things from their own perspective. They understand things from their peers' perspectives as well. And it's very rare that a child will understand life, financial situations from their parents' perspectives. I think children, teenagers who would have some kind of an understanding would probably be those whose parents have had a conversation with them about the financial situations in their homes.
For many teenagers, what matters the most is a sense of belonging among their peer groups. Fashion and the latest cell phone are often non-negotiable.
Parents are old-fashioned, you know. They grew up in that generation where nothing really mattered. You know, you go to school with your cornrows, it's normal. But us now, it's like, it's different, you know. So yes, it is a way of manipulation, but like, it's the kind of things we encounter as teenagers.
You see your friends having this and you like, you are people, lust is a thing. So you eventually gonna want what your friend has. So you're gonna like pressurize your mom into buying you whatever it is that your friends have. So I think like friends, like peer pressure is like the main factor.
These teenagers are prepared to go the extra mile to obtain almost everything that they want from their unsuspecting parents. Many of them say they use school to manipulate their parents to give in to their demands.
You use school as an excuse. I mean, no parent will say no to education. If I come and say, Mama, go to school and buy a book, and like the book is like $200. My mom's gonna do it because she never had the opportunity to get the education that she wanted, and then she wants better for me.
Besides school, I also use my friends as an example because my mom wants me to like have everything that she never had. So if I tell her that my friends have this and like she thinks about like things that happen to her, like her not having the things that her friends used to have. So I'm gonna tell her, Mom, my friend has this, and she's gonna be like, I'll try where I try and I'll try to give you what I can afford.
We know that, you know, the parents' weaknesses are like academics, you know. So every time when having to get that something expensive, I need to align it in school to my school, you know.
Community activist Angie Shalembe blames parents for making it easier for their children to manipulate them.
Imagine a child coming to you and saying the school needs 1,000 rands. and you give the 1,000 rands. I'm working with children who are under the influence. In most cases, when I interview the parents, it took them quite a long time to finally know or realize that the child is under influence. And all this time, they've been coming 50 rand, 100 rand, and you're just giving and lying about the school. Eventually, you're going to find out that you've been feeding a demon in your own house.
Shalembe says many parents know very little about the character of their children on the streets.
As parents, you never dream of having anything different than an angel as a child. So whenever we see them, we see angels. So it is hard for me to can even think that my child could be capable of committing anything that is wrong or drastic. Okay? And these children are manipulative, I must tell you. The manner in which they behave in the street is not the manner in which they behave when they are at home.
Some struggling parents often borrow from relatives and friends to satisfy their children's endless demands.
I know at home there's like this lady they used to borrow money from, so when you need money for school, you actually overstate the amount. Like, for an example, if school requires like 50 rand, and then go ahead and be like, yo, school wants 500 rand. So yeah, we've had those encounters where my parents actually had to go to a mashonisa to get the money and negotiate the terms, the interest, and etc.
I didn't have a phone. My friends had phones. So I was like, no, I'm going to lie to that extreme point, right? A friend of mine had already offered to give me blazer because like I was already becoming an RCL. So he offered to give me blazer and I was like, it still looks new. If I take money from my mom and say, I bought the blazer, she'd believe me.
It's not that hard, but I, for one, I feel guilty. So, I have to think hard about it first and, think about, do I really want it to that extent to, lie to her and pressurize her into buying me whatever it is that I want? But it's kind of easy because, she's my mom and she believes me. So, I'm last born, last born tendencies. She believes everything that I say and, she eventually does what I want her to do.
Experts say being a present parent can go a long way to help you avoid being manipulated by your children. Tsepo Mungwai, SABC News, Johannesburg.
Thank you for staying with The Week Ahead. 4 accused are expected to appear in the Bloemfontein Magistrates Court on the 3rd and 4th of May in connection with convicted murderer and rapist Thabo Beeste's escape from Mangaung prison. G4S employee Motanya Masukela, former G4S employee Sinohe Matsuara, CCTV operator Tebuho Dipolo and Dr. Nandipha Makudumana face charges of aiding and abetting a convict's escape from lawful custody and defeating the ends of justice. Dr. Makudumana's father, Zolile Sekeleni, was granted bail of 10,000 rand. He's the only accused who has so far been granted bail. Convicted rapist and murderer Thabo Beeste also made a brief appearance 2 weeks ago. Beeste and Sekeleni are expected to be back in court on 16 May. An extraordinary council meeting will be convened on Tuesday for the election of a new City of Johannesburg mayor. Former Executive Mayor Tsapelo Ahmad resigned ahead of a council meeting where he was facing a vote of no confidence motion. The coalition partners that voted Ahmad in power have vowed to protect the Speaker of Council and the Chief Whip. They say the coalition remains intact and strong in spite of the resignation and unhappiness expressed by the Patriotic Alliance President Gayton Mackenzie. Mackenzie, who had once raised his hand for the position, which has now become vacant, said he would focus on campaigning for next year's national elections.
When you have constant change of political leadership, you actually compromise service delivery. When you have constant change of political leadership, you actually frustrated the support staff that is supposed to work in the city of Johannesburg. And I'm quite certain that most people that are working in the city of Johannesburg and those who are directly working with politicians are constantly frustrated because committees are constantly changing. There is new personnel on a regular basis. At the same time, when the new political leadership has to come in, there is a huge possibility for changes in terms of the direction of the different portfolios that are there in the city. And that has a huge impact on the rearrangement of the work by those that are supporting the politicians themselves. Equally, those that are supposed to be the recipients of services from the city are the ones that suffer most, because service delivery is affected when there is this constant infighting amongst politicians.
Gauteng Premier Panyaza Lesufi has announced the provincial deployment of the 6,000 crime prevention wardens. Gauteng residents say the deployment is long overdue. This new initiative by the Gauteng government aims to create a zero crime tolerance environment in the townships, business precincts and popular crime hotspots. The provincial government has spent over 400 million rand on training and acquiring high-speed vehicles and drones to assist in the operations.
5 months ago, we declared that we'll hire 6,000 young men and women to be a force multiplier to the police and those that are assigned the task to keep Gauteng safe. Our enemies made joke about that. Our enemies felt that this is a dream that cannot be realized. Our enemies even went on public radio stations and say, "Inganakwani le anyeke yenzakala." Provincial Police, Lieutenant Mawela, I'm proud to declare that we are handing over to you 8,000 new ICs that will supplement all the police force and the police work in Gauteng, with 200 new motor vehicles and almost 75 police vehicles. Lieutenant General Mawela, these police vans, they don't come from the budget of Begitele. These police vans that you see, they come from the budget of the people of Gauteng who are tired of crime and who want police to be there when we need them. We are sending a strong message to criminals. And we are also sending a strong message to our communities. Gone are the days when you phone a police station requesting for protection and police stations will say they don't have cars. From the 1st of May, there will be no single police station in Gauteng without a motor vehicle. We are doing this because we have chosen peace. We are doing this because we are tired of criminals. We are doing this to send a very strong message to criminals. Your time is up. It's game over now. Provincial Commissioner, we are handing over to you 2 of the 6 helicopters so that when a crime happens now, we must be there now without any excuse, so that we can flush out those criminals. We are handing over these helicopters not for fun, for one thing and one thing only, that if you commit crime in Gauteng, we will be there within a second. We'll track you until the ground force catch up with you and you'll go straight to jail. This is not the end. General Mawela, in the next 14 to 15 days, we are releasing almost 8,000 new CCTV cameras across Gauteng, so that there is no inch of Gauteng that is not monitored by cameras. So that any person that commit any crime, we can catch them in the act and we can dispatch the police force to go and arrest them immediately.
And that is where we leave it for today. Until next weekend, thank you so much for tuning in. Have a blessed week.